China has issued a defiant response to the latest round of U.S. tariffs, accusing Washington of launching what Beijing calls the largest trade war in economic history. Welcome viewers to my channel. Please subscribe, like my video and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next update. The dispute, which has been brewing for years, entered a dangerous new phase after tariffs worth $34 billion on Chinese goods took effect, followed almost immediately by China's retaliatory measures of equal value. What once seemed like posturing has now materialized into a full-scale confrontation with global ramifications. The U.S. tariffs target an extensive range of goods, from electronic components to industrial machinery, intended to penalize China for practices that the Trump administration deems unfair. Beijing, in turn, has struck back with equal force, imposing 25% duties on 545 U.S. products, including high-profile exports such as soybeans, automobiles, and seafood. These items were deliberately chosen, not only because of their economic significance but also because they represent industries concentrated in regions of the U.S. that heavily supported Donald Trump during the 2016 election. China's Ministry of Commerce has also escalated the dispute to the World Trade Organization, filing a formal complaint against the U.S. tariffs. The complaint signals that Beijing intends to use both legal frameworks and retaliatory actions to push back against Washington's aggressive trade agenda. But China is not alone in facing off against the U.S. Russia, still stung by earlier American tariffs on steel and aluminum, has announced new duties on a range of American imports that can be easily replaced with domestic substitutes. These include road building machinery, tools for the oil and gas sector, and mining equipment. Russian officials estimate that the U.S. steel and aluminum tariffs will cost their companies more than $500 million, making retaliation a matter of both economic and political necessity. President Trump has consistently framed the tariffs as part of his campaign to protect American workers and industries. He argues that for decades, the U.S. has been exploited through unfair trade practices, particularly by China, which he accuses of intellectual property theft and forced technology transfers. Yet Trump's strategy is not limited to the initial $34 billion in tariffs. In public remarks, he has threatened to target as much as $500 billion in Chinese imports, the total value of goods that China exported to the U.S. in 2017. Such a sweeping measure would effectively place duties on every Chinese product entering the American market. A final tranche of $300 billion, also, in abeyance, that could be activated if the conflict escalates further. This layered approach underscores Trump's willingness to escalate the conflict to its absolute limit if Beijing refuses to meet his demands. Financial institutions such as Morgan Stanley estimate that the tariffs already in place account for about 0.6% of global trade and 0.1% of global GDP. While these numbers may sound modest, the prospect of tariffs covering $500 billion in goods raises the stakes exponentially, threatening to destabilize global markets and upend long-established supply chains. The trade war has not only divided nations, it has also deepened divisions within the White House itself. The Trump administration is split between hardliners, who advocate for aggressive confrontation, and moderates, who prefer a more cautious, diplomatic approach. One of the most outspoken hardliners is Peter Navarro, the president's trade advisor, who has long argued that China poses an existential economic threat to the United States. Navarro and his allies believe that only drastic measures, such as broad tariffs, can rebalance the playing field and restore U.S. manufacturing dominance. On the other side are moderates, many of whom are holdovers from the Obama administration. These officials argue that tariffs risk alienating allies, destabilizing global markets, and harming American businesses that rely on imported goods or export markets. They favor negotiations, alliances, and multilateral pressure rather than unilateral trade wars. Journalists covering the White House have noted how visible this divide has become. At press briefings, hardliners often scramble for the spotlight, pushing Trump's harsher economic message, while moderates remain subdued, reluctant to openly challenge the president. This dynamic reflects a larger ideological struggle. Trump and his core team are committed to disruptive change, while others within the administration quietly seek to temper his most aggressive instincts. Chinese leaders have repeatedly insisted that Beijing does not want a trade war, but they also make clear they will not be intimidated. Premier Li Keqiang struck a conciliatory yet firm tone: trade war is never a solution. China would never start a trade war, but if any party resorts to an increase of tariffs, then China will take measures in response to protect development interests. At the same time, China's state-run China Daily unleashed a scathing editorial, likening the Trump administration to a gang of hoodlums, shaking down other nations for concessions. This language underscores the growing frustration within Beijing, where leaders are under pressure to show they can stand up to Washington's bullying tactics without appearing weak. Russia, for its part, has also framed its retaliation as a defense of sovereignty. Moscow argues that the U.S. tariffs on steel and aluminum, introduced in March, are unfair and politically motivated. Russian officials say their counter-duties are not just about economics but also about showing that Russia will not be pushed around by Washington. Economists remain divided on the likely trajectory of the conflict. Analysts at Bank of America Merrill Lynch predict that the U.S. and China will continue to exchange retaliatory measures but expect only a modest escalation in the short term. However, they warn that the possibility of a recession-inducing trade war cannot be dismissed if both sides dig in their heels. Rob Carnell, chief Asia economist at ING, takes a somewhat more optimistic view, suggesting that while the tariffs will undoubtedly slow growth, they do not spell economic catastrophe. This is not economic Armageddon, he said. We will not have to hunt our food with pointy sticks. But it is applying the brakes to a global economy that has less durable momentum than appears to be the case. Already, multinational corporations are feeling the impact. Automaker BMW, which operates a massive plant in Spartanburg, South Carolina, announced it could not fully absorb the cost of Beijing's 25% tariff on U.S. car exports. As a result, the company said it would be forced to raise prices in China, potentially hurting its competitive position in the world's largest automotive market. Other industries are bracing for similar shocks. U.S. soybean farmers, heavily dependent on Chinese buyers, are among the most vulnerable. The tariffs have created uncertainty that could force them to seek new markets, though few alternatives can match China's demand. Likewise, U.S. seafood exporters, particularly in Maine's lobster industry, face the prospect of losing a lucrative market to Canadian competitors. Beyond the U.S., China, and Russia, the unfolding trade war threatens to reshape the global economy. Supply chains in industries ranging from electronics to agriculture stretch across multiple countries, meaning that tariffs between two nations can disrupt production worldwide. For example, a smartphone assembled in China might rely on components manufactured in South Korea, Japan, or Taiwan. Tariffs on Chinese goods entering the U.S. could therefore hurt companies and workers in those third-party countries, illustrating how intertwined the global economy has become. The European Union, Mexico, and Canada have also been drawn into disputes with the U.S. after Trump imposed tariffs on steel and aluminum imports earlier in the year. Each of these partners has retaliated with their own counter-duties, targeting iconic American products from bourbon whiskey to Harley-Davidson motorcycles. These measures demonstrate how quickly isolated trade skirmishes can snowball into broader conflicts. The escalating tensions between Washington, Beijing, and Moscow have ushered in a new era of uncertainty. While Trump insists the tariffs are a necessary defense of American jobs and innovation, critics warn that the costs may ultimately fall on consumers, businesses, and workers worldwide. For China, the trade war is both an economic challenge and a test of national pride. For Russia, it is another front in an ongoing struggle with Washington. And for the rest of the world, it is a dangerous reminder of how quickly global stability can be undermined when major powers clash. Whether this dispute remains a series of tit-for-tat skirmishes or spirals into a full-blown trade war will depend on the willingness of leaders on both sides to compromise. For now, the world watches anxiously as the stakes rise higher with each new tariff